The elevator doors opened directly into chaos. Security guards in black suits were shouting into radios, assistants scrambled across the marbled floors, and reporters were already swarming the lobby of Crane Tech Tower. Camera flashes lit up the atrium like a battlefield. In the eye of the storm stood Elliot Crane, once hailed as the visionary billionaire behind the world's most disruptive AI empire, now a man watching his empire fall apart by the hour. His face was stoic, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. His tailored gray suit, probably the last thing he still owned from the past life, clung to him like old armor. Elliot took a breath. Behind him, Mara stepped out of the elevator. She was the only one still there. The board had resigned. Investors had fled. Even his lawyer had sent a text that morning saying, "You're radioactive. I'm out." But Mara, his former communications director, stood beside him like the building wasn't crumbling under their feet. "Are you sure you want to do this press conference?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "They want a villain," Elliot replied, adjusting the mic on his lapel. "Let them meet the monster." "No," she said, reaching out and fixing his collar. "Let them meet the man who's not afraid to tell the truth." A voice crackled through the PA system. "Mr. Crane, the room is ready." Mara's hand lingered for a second longer on his arm. "Whatever happens out there, I believe in you." That hit harder than anything the media could throw. The doors opened to the press conference room. 100 faces turned. Laptops clicked. Flashes blinded. Microphones crowded the podium like knives. Elliot stepped up. Mara stood just behind the curtain, watching, a silent sentinel in a sea of doubt. He leaned forward. "You've all heard the rumors," he began, his voice calm but defiant. "They say I lied, that I stole, that I ran a billion-dollar company into the ground because of ego. Let me make one thing clear." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I did none of those things. But I did trust the wrong people, and I did underestimate how far some would go to destroy me." A gasp swept the room. Elliot didn't blink. Outside, social media was already melting. Hashtag Crane Collapse was trending. But another tag had just started gaining momentum. Hashtag She Stayed. Because in that moment, every camera caught it. Mara, stepping into the frame, standing beside him. No title, no paycheck, no obligation, just belief. And the world noticed. The next morning, the world had changed. Mara blinked awake to the buzz of her cracked phone lighting up beside the couch. She hadn't even made it to her bed the night before, just collapsed after the adrenaline crash. She reached for the phone, eyes still adjusting. 346 new messages, 12 missed calls, and a headline that made her heart stop. "Fire the woman who stood by a fallen billionaire. Who is Mara Ellis?" New York Times. She sat up. Her name was everywhere. News anchors debated her motives. TikTok edits romanticized her loyalty with dramatic music. Influencers praised her queen energy, while former Crane Tech execs scrambled to distance themselves. But Mara didn't care about the headlines. She scrolled until she found what she was really looking for, the trending clip of Elliot's speech. At the end, she appeared, just behind him, placing a hand on his back as he faced the vultures. That single moment had become a symbol. She checked her email. 3 documentary offers, 2 interview requests, a sponsorship deal for energy drinks. She tossed the phone aside. Across the city, in a suite that used to be a boardroom, Elliot Crane sat alone, hunched over a laptop, eyes bloodshot, a day-old coffee beside him. No staff, no advisors, just silence and spreadsheets. A knock. Mara peeked in. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell," Elliot muttered. "We lost another contract overnight. Avalon Labs pulled their AI partnership. That was a $90 million deal." Mara dropped her bag. "So let's fight back." He gave her a tired look. "You don't have to be here, you know. You could take the book deal. Or the Netflix show." "I didn't stand by you for a camera," she said, sitting across from him. "I stood by you because I know the truth. And if you want to clear your name, we start now." Elliot hesitated, then nodded. For the next 8 hours, they worked like soldiers in a bunker. Mara dug through old emails. Elliot traced the web of sabotage, the offshore shell companies, the manipulated audits, the signatures that weren't his. Around midnight, Elliot leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You ever think maybe this is all pointless?" he asked. "Maybe the world's already decided who I am." Mara looked at him, the exhausted man behind the billionaire mask. Then let's give them a reason to change their mind. Silence. Then, slowly, for the first time in days, Elliot smiled. Not because he had won anything, but because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting alone. 2 days later, they found it. Buried deep in a chain of encrypted documents, one file stood out. It was a scanned signature authorization dated 6 weeks before the Crane Tech collapse, a $120 million asset transfer from Crane Tech's primary account to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. But the signature on the transfer wasn't Elliot's. Not exactly. Mara squinted. That's your name, but the slant is wrong. And look, your real signature has that loop on the C. This one doesn't. Elliot leaned in. You're right. That's forged. Which means someone tried to frame you for laundering, she whispered, the reality hitting her. That's felony-level fraud. He stood up, his pulse rising. Only 3 people had access to my private authorization tokens. Me, legal, and... He froze. Mara already knew the name. Jonas Marwick, former CFO. Once Elliot's closest friend. The same man who disappeared the morning after the scandal broke, claiming mental health leave, and ghosting every board inquiry since. Elliot's jaw clenched. He used me to build this company, then sold me out and ran. But why? Mara asked. Because I wouldn't sell the company to Infrasin. They offered double market value. Jonas wanted the payday. I said no. Mara's eyes narrowed. So he tanked the company on purpose, to force the sale. Elliot didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. But there was a problem, evidence or not. No one would believe a disgraced billionaire and a communications director. The media had already chosen their villain. And Jonas? He was out there somewhere, already shaping the next chapter. Unless they beat him to it. Mara's fingers flew across the keyboard. We leaked the signature. Anonymously. Not to the big papers, they're bought. But an independent source. Someone with reach, no corporate leash. Elliot looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You've done this before. She didn't smile. Crisis PR is just war by other means. Minutes later, they uploaded the file to the Glass Ledger, a rogue journalist site known for taking down corrupt tech giants. The title was simple. Crane Tech's sabotage. Leaked signature suggests internal fraud. Within an hour, the site crashed from traffic. By morning, it was the top story worldwide. And for the first time since his downfall, Elliot Crane wasn't trending for failure. He was trending for revenge. The backlash was instant. By dawn, Jonas Marwick's face was plastered across every screen. Not as a whistleblower. Not as a victim of the Crane Tech collapse. But as a traitor. Breaking. Former Crane Tech CFO linked to forged transfers. Exclusive. Anonymous leak points to executive-level sabotage. Was Elliot Crane framed? Mara sat at the edge of Elliot's desk, sipping her now-cold coffee, watching the headlines flicker across the wall-mounted screen. You're not a villain anymore, she said softly. Elliot didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the footage of Jonas, taken just months before, laughing at a product launch, arms slung around Elliot's shoulder. A lie, captured in high resolution. I don't want to be a hero either, Elliot muttered. I just want the truth out there. For once. Mara nodded. Then we keep pushing. This is just the start. The buzz of the building returned, slowly. Phone calls were coming in again. Not from lawyers, but from journalists, small tech founders, old friends who had once ghosted. Even a few investors began testing the waters. But the most unexpected message came through private line. It was from Ava Hartman, CEO of Infrasin Technologies, the company Jonas tried to sell Crane Tech to. We didn't know about the internal sabotage. This changes everything. Would you consider a meeting? Elliot tossed his phone on the table. She wants to talk now. Of course. Mara raised an eyebrow. We could use her. If Infrasin turns on Jonas publicly, it'll crush whatever narrative he's still clinging to. Elliot narrowed his eyes. Or it's a trap. Then don't go alone. He looked at her. She didn't flinch. So they went together. The rooftop restaurant was private, shielded by tinted glass and silent waitstaff. Ava Hartman was already there, sleek in a white power suit, her smile calculated and cold. Elliot, she said, rising. You look better than I expected. Disappointment suits me, he said dryly, pulling out a chair for Mara before sitting himself. Ava gave Mara a glance, amused. So this is the woman the world's falling in love with. I'm not here for romance, Mara said. I'm here to find out why your company was in bed with a traitor. Ava's smile faded. We were never involved in sabotage, she said firmly. Jonas came to us independently. The moment we suspected foul play, we backed out. Then help us take him down, Elliot said. Publicly. A pause. Then Ava leaned back, steepling her fingers. If Jonas goes down, so does half your old board. Are you ready to burn that bridge? Elliot didn't hesitate. I already walked through fire. What's a few more flames? Ava gave a slow, dangerous smile. Then let's make it public. Mara didn't move, but her heart was racing. Because she knew, this was the real turning point. They weren't just clearing Elliot's name now. They were starting a war. That night, it aired. Ava Hartman, live on international business television, sitting across from a stone-faced anchor, delivering one sentence that detonated across the tech world like a bomb. We believe Jonas Marwick acted in direct violation of internal ethics and legal standards, and we are cooperating with investigators to ensure full transparency. She didn't mention Elliot's name. She didn't need to. The implication was clear. Crane Tech hadn't collapsed due to mismanagement. It had been sabotaged from the inside, and the world was listening. Mara watched the clip replay on a dozen screens in the Crane Tech crisis suite, which was quickly turning back into a war room. Interns, volunteers, and even some ex-employees who had ghosted weeks ago were quietly showing up again. Elliot stepped out of a call with one of his old investors, face unreadable. They want to talk about relaunching, he said slowly. Seed funding. Minimal oversight. They think I'm the underdog now. A good brand to bet on. Mara smirked. People love a comeback story. But Elliot wasn't smiling. I'm not sure I want their money. Not after how fast they ran. She crossed her arms. Then fund it yourself. You still own 12 patents. License them. Sell your car. Hell, I'll sell my apartment if I have to. He looked at her, startled. She shrugged. I'm in this. Whether we're building tech or lighting matches. Elliot's voice dropped. Why are you still here, Mara? Really? She hesitated. The question hung in the air between them like electricity before a storm. Because when everything burned down, you didn't lie. You didn't deflect. You faced it. And I've worked with 100 great men. None of them had the guts to do that. Elliot didn't reply. He just reached across the table and took her hand. Not for show. Not for survival. But because, for the first time in weeks, he let himself feel something. But the moment was cut short. A phone buzzed. Mara grabbed it and read the message aloud. Breaking, Jonas Marwick detained by authorities in Geneva. Facing extradition. The room went still, then exploded in cheers. But Elliot didn't move. He just looked out the window at the skyline, half of which he used to own, and whispered, Now we rebuild. The new headquarters was nothing like the old one. No panoramic glass walls. No private elevators. No espresso bar on every floor. Just an old brick warehouse on the outskirts of the city, damp, echoing, and cold. But it was real, and it was theirs. Elliot stood in the middle of the space, blueprints rolled out on a dusty table, wires dangling from the ceiling above. You sure this doesn't scare you off? He asked Mara. She smiled. This place has potential. So do we. They called the new venture Ashlight Technologies, a name Elliot chose because it symbolized two things, destruction and hope. Like light rising from ashes. There was no launch party. No VC backers with million-dollar smiles. Just long hours. Empty takeout boxes. A few loyal engineers coding until sunrise. And Mara, running PR, fundraising, media strategy, and still managing to brew the only decent coffee in the building. But the press didn't stay away for long. After Jonas Marwick's arrest in Geneva and the formal launch of an international investigation into board-level fraud, the narrative flipped. Elliot Crane was no longer the villain of a fallen tech empire. He was now the man who was betrayed and fought back. Interviews flooded in. He declined most. But when the Glass Ledger, the same outlet that ran the leak, asked for a feature, he said yes. Mara prepped him. Be honest. Be human. Don't try to sound like the old billionaire. Just sound like the man you are now. He nodded. When the article dropped, one paragraph went viral. They took everything. My reputation, my company, my future. And when I had nothing left, she stayed. One person. That's all it takes to keep someone from falling apart. Comment sections lit up with one phrase. Hashtag one person is enough. People weren't just watching now, they were rooting for him. For them. 2 weeks later, a surprising call came in. A government contract, small but real. A chance to test Ashlight's early-stage neural mapping tool for emergency medical response. It wasn't flashy, but it was a beginning. That night, Elliot and Mara sat on the warehouse roof under the stars, drinking lukewarm coffee. "This isn't how I pictured rebuilding my life," Elliot said. Mara leaned against his shoulder. "No, I always imagined doing it alone, fighting back on my own terms. But now, I'm starting to think maybe strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing who's standing beside you." Mara smiled. "Then you're stronger than ever." And for once, Elliot didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who'd been given something far rarer. A second chance, with someone who never needed his money to believe in his worth. The next attack wasn't digital. It came in the form of a lawsuit. Elliot stared at the thick stack of papers delivered by a trembling courier. The name at the top sent a chill through his chest. Crane Tech Holdings versus Elliot Crane, for breach of fiduciary duty. Even after the collapse, the husk of his old company, now in the hands of cold interim leadership and scavenging legal sharks, had come back for him. Not just to block Ashlight, but to destroy him completely. "They're trying to say you damaged the brand on purpose," Mara said, flipping through the documents. "That your press conference, your leak, your interviews, all of it was malicious." Elliot clenched his jaw. "They're trying to bury me in court fees." Mara was already on the phone. "I'll call Ava. Infrason still has evidence of board-level sabotage. If we get her to testify." Elliot grabbed her hand gently, pulling the phone down. "No, this time we fight with what we've built, not with who we know." "But Elliot, I've leaned on too many powerful allies in the past. I won't trade one dependency for another. Ashlight has to stand on its own." She looked at him. He meant it. He didn't want to win because of favors. He wanted to win because he earned it. So they dug in. Day after day, Mara coordinated a legal response team while Elliot doubled down on product development. They worked around the clock, surrounded by blueprints and cables, eating dinner on keyboards, sleeping in turns on a beaten couch. Word of the lawsuit got out, and the online tide turned again. People questioned Elliot's intentions. Is this all a media play? Can you ever really trust a billionaire? What if this whole redemption arc is staged? One night, Mara walked into the warehouse to find Elliot staring at the glowing city skyline, his expression heavy. "I'm losing them again," he said quietly. "The public. The momentum." She came beside him. "Then let them go." He looked at her, surprised. "You don't need the world to love you, Elliot," she said. "You just need to build something that matters. Something that works. That helps people. That proves you're more than the headlines." He exhaled slowly. "You think they'll ever stop looking at me like a walking scandal?" "No," she said softly. "But maybe one day, they'll start seeing you as something else too." That night, Elliot made a decision. He published the first open-source toolkit from Ashlight, a neural emergency response framework that hospitals and EMTs could use for free. No paywall, no licensing. Within 72 hours, 5 hospitals were testing it. Within a week, it saved its first life, a child in Baltimore who was diagnosed with a rare seizure disorder thanks to real-time neural pattern detection. The story spread like wildfire. And for once, no one cared about the lawsuit. They only cared that Elliot Crane had built something good, something real. Elliot Crane didn't do galas anymore. He hadn't worn a tux since the scandal. He hadn't walked a red carpet since the whispers started. But tonight, after weeks of legal battles, late nights, and public silence, he was back in the spotlight. Not because he wanted it, because they needed to show the world who they had become. The invitation had come from the Tech for Humanity Foundation, a high-profile charity event where Elliot was once a keynote speaker. Now, they had invited him back, quietly, as a guest, but everyone knew the real reason. The world was watching again. Mara adjusted his bow tie, stepping back to inspect the look. "Still fits," she said. "Barely," Elliot muttered. "This thing feels like a noose." "Try not to look like you're walking to your execution," she teased. "You're walking into a redemption." They arrived together. Cameras exploded the second they stepped from the car. This time, Mara didn't hang in the background. She walked beside Elliot, her hand on his arm, chin high, unafraid. The whispers began immediately. "That's her, the one who stayed. Is it true he gave away all the patents? I heard Ashlight saved a kid's life last week." They entered the grand hall under a ceiling of glass and gold. Music swelled, glasses clinked, and power players watched their every move. Then came the moment no one expected. Ava Hartman stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. Innovation isn't just about code. It's about courage, she said. And sometimes, courage means returning to the place that tried to erase you and standing taller than before. She turned. Elliot Crane, please join me on stage. The room froze. Mara gave him a slight nod. Elliot walked forward. He stood beside Ava, facing the crowd that once judged him. The same faces who called him reckless, unstable, unworthy. He waited for the jeers, the murmurs, but they didn't come. Instead, the room erupted into applause. Not thunderous, not wild, but real. A standing ovation from people who had once walked away. Elliot spoke, brief, raw, unpolished. I built something. Then I lost everything. But the one thing that never left was someone who believed I could still be more than what I was. That belief is why I'm standing here today. Not to prove myself, but to remind you what loyalty looks like. He turned slightly toward Mara in the audience. She smiled, eyes glassy. The crowd followed his gaze. And just like that, the narrative changed again. Not about Elliot, but about her. She wasn't just the woman who stood by a billionaire. She was the reason he rose again. The morning after the gala, everything was different. Every news outlet covered it. But this time, the stories weren't about Elliot's downfall. They were about his resurgence. And more than that, they were about her. Mara Ellis, the quiet architect behind Ashlight's rise. She believed in him before the world did. Now he's changing it. Inside the new power couple of tech and redemption, Mara scrolled through the headlines in disbelief. Her phone buzzed nonstop with texts from old colleagues, strangers, reporters, and even students asking if she gave mentorship. She hadn't asked for attention, but the world had seen her, not just as the woman behind Elliot Crane, but as the spine that held everything together. Elliot, meanwhile, was already at work. The Ashlight offices, now renovated, warm, buzzing with energy, were alive with engineers, developers, and researchers who actually wanted to be there. But when he saw Mara step in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, he paused everything. "You're famous," he said with a grin. She rolled her eyes. "You too. Again." They walked into the strategy room, where the team had gathered around a new proposal, a joint partnership with the city's emergency services to integrate Ashlight's AI response tech into ambulances across 5 states. "This is it," Elliot said. "This is real impact. Not stock prices. Not interviews. Lives saved. Futures protected. And no one can take this from you," Mara added. "Because you built it out of nothing." Elliot looked at her, something unspoken behind his eyes. "No," he said. "We built it." A quiet knock at the door. One of the new legal advisors poked in, holding a fresh document. "It's official," she said. "The lawsuit from Crane Tech Holdings has been dropped. Full retraction. Public apology pending." Gasps and cheers echoed around the room. Mara froze. "They apologized?" she repeated. "They folded," the advisor said. "Turns out, their internal review confirmed everything. They don't want the world seeing what else we could leak." Elliot exhaled deeply, not from relief, from release. He wasn't fighting anymore. He had won. But he didn't raise his arms in victory. He didn't post a statement. He just turned to Mara and whispered, "We can finally stop surviving." She smiled. "And start living." Later that evening, as the city skyline glowed in soft amber, Elliot and Mara stood side by side on the rooftop. No crowds. No cameras. Just peace. She looked over at him. "You know, I never asked for anything in return." "I know," he said. "But if I did, I think I'd ask for one thing." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Name it." She turned, her voice low. "Tell me you'd do the same, if it had been me." He didn't hesitate. "I'd burn the whole world down for you." A month later, the world got the shock it never expected. It wasn't a product launch. It wasn't another viral quote. It wasn't even a scandal. It was a wedding invitation, handwritten, elegant, and completely out of nowhere. The name on the card? Elliot Crane and Mara Ellis invite you to witness the beginning of their next chapter. No cameras, no press, just a quiet garden tucked into the hills of Sonoma, surrounded by red oaks and people who actually mattered. Former engineers, rescue workers who used Ashlight's tech, the child whose life was saved by their system, now laughing, chasing butterflies down the aisle. Elliot stood in a dark navy suit, no tie, hair loose for once. eyes never leaving Mara as she approached, barefoot on the grass, hair wild in the wind, a quiet fire in her step. She had never looked more like herself. The same woman who had stood beside him when everything burned. The same woman who had refused to run. And now, the woman he was going to spend his life building, breaking, laughing, and starting over with. The ceremony was short. When the officiant asked if they had prepared their own vows, Elliot shook his head. Instead, he looked at Mara and said, "I made a list of everything I lost. The company, the reputation, the money, and then I made a list of what I gained. There was only one name on that second list. Yours." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the weight of all the storms they had survived, and the quiet, unshakable joy of what had remained standing through them all. When the kiss came, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't showy. It was real. And that night, without headlines or trending tags, Elliot Crane, the man who had once ruled the world and then lost it, disappeared from the public eye. Not because he fell again, but because, for once, he didn't need to be seen to know he had won. In the months that followed, Ashlight became a quiet revolution, powering hospitals, relief teams, and underfunded cities with AI tools no one had thought to build before. Elliot never gave another press conference, but the world never stopped talking about the moment he stood beside the woman who never left. And how, when the world expected another power grab or publicity stunt, his reaction was simple. He chose her. Long after the noise faded, after the lawsuits were closed and the company was thriving, after the wedding and the photos and the champagne had dried, Elliot sat alone in the tiny upstairs office of the warehouse that started it all. A framed photo of him and Mara sat beside his desk. She was laughing in it. He was looking at her. He reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out an old, creased envelope. Unsent, unopened, written in his darkest hour. He had written it the night the board left. The night he'd sat in the Crane Tech boardroom, surrounded by silence, with Mara asleep on the couch in the next room. The only person who hadn't walked away. The letter was addressed to her. He read it again for the first time. "Mara, I don't expect you to stay. In fact, I think you'd be a fool if you did. The empire is burning. The press smells blood. Everyone has already chosen their side, and mine is the losing one. But I need you to know, I remember the way you stood in front of me when no one else would. The way you looked at me not with pity, but challenge. And if, by some impossible miracle, you're still here when the sun rises, if you choose to stay, I swear I'll never forget it. And if I make it through this, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I was worth that belief." He folded it gently, then tore it in half. He didn't need to give her that letter now, because he had already given her everything in it. With his actions, his honesty, his loyalty, and his love. Downstairs, he heard the door open and her voice calling up. "You still working?" He smiled. "No," he said, standing. "Just remembering how far we've come." She appeared at the stairwell, holding 2 mugs of coffee, his the exact way he liked it. "Then come downstairs," she said. "We've got a meeting with the Refugee AI Initiative in 20. And afterward, we're taking the rest of the day off. Doctor's orders." "Doctors?" he asked. She held up a small ultrasound printout. He froze. She raised an eyebrow. "Still want to work all night?" He walked toward her, stunned, overwhelmed, and silently amazed that even now, life still found ways to shock him, especially when she was beside him.